In this video, I'm going to share with you a bit of insight into how I personally draw heads. Now, there are lots of videos and resources out there already for learning how to draw the head. So instead of regurgitating all of that information, I'm just going to go through some of the more unconventional little tricks that I've either seen around or that I've come up with to draw the head in different angles. So now with that said, this is how I draw the head. So the first tip that I want to share with you is for those of you who prefer to draw the head using the classic circle and crosshair. I feel like this goes without saying by now, but I feel like every artist out there has drawn a head with these guidelines once or twice, and for good reason. It's simple enough of a concept to grasp and equally simple to execute, considering that it's just a circle and two lines. But where my tip comes in is specifically in regards to the eye line that you draw on this circle, which is the one that goes horizontally across. And my tip basically is just, instead of drawing one line across the circle like this, to instead draw two separate lines, one for the position of the eyes and then one for the side of the head. And the reason why this has always been helpful for me is that the corner here that these two lines create gives me a good idea of where the forehead stops and the side of the head begins in a way. And this corner here, if I draw a line going back to the circle, it gives me roughly the distance of the forehead to the back of the head. So if I was drawing a head looking up, using just one line like this, it's kind of hard for me to tell at which point on this line the actual head begins. So when I draw two lines, again one being for the placement of the eyes and the other for the side of the head, it's much easier for me to distinguish what is the front of the head and what is the side of the head. From a front-facing view, I draw the one line for the eyes and two other lines going back towards the circle at an angle since the sides of our heads go back in space. And since these 2 points tell me where the front of the face stops and the side begins, I can just draw the shape of the head according to those guidelines. In a way, I'm picturing as though the head were a box, and this corner just helped me see the dimensions of the head much clearer by squaring it off, much like a box would be. That's essentially the purpose of this tip, to take advantage of how clear the 3D-ness of a box is and applying that to an otherwise flat shape like a circle. Picturing those two lines as though they were traveling across two separate planes of a box just makes it easier to see those planes without the box actually being there. Now this leads me to a very common technique that you might have heard before, which is the Lumis Method. And the idea behind the Lumis Method is essentially that by drawing another circle within the initial circle for the head, it can simulate the different planes of the head and make it much easier for you to see them, almost as if you cut a slice of the circle off. In other words, if I drew a head facing the front, the side of the circle will be chopped off, and then I'm just left with this shape for the head. And my thing with this method has always just been that instead of drawing a circle and cutting off the sides every time, I just draw the shape of the head with the sides already chopped. A pre-cut head, if you will. So it's basically just a line like this, which is kind of just a more obtuse greater than sign. And use that for the top and the bottom of the head and just connecting the sides of it like this. And this is how I draw this simplification of the head. And the neat thing about this shape is that it's actually pretty versatile in being able to convey a head in different angles by just changing the features of the head and not the actual shape itself. So in a front-facing view, it'll look like this, and just by changing the position of the ears and the mouth, I have a head from a low angle, or the head looking up, and the same for the head looking down. And it all stems from just this one shape that kind of looks like a rupee from The Legend of Zelda. Now for a head in a profile view, it starts off the same way as before with this greater than symbol sort of line, and the line for the front of the face, and for the back of the head, instead of drawing this line all the way down like the other one, I'm going to draw it up to about halfway down. Then I'll draw a line going in to indicate the actual back of the head, and this line more or less will line up to that little corner point at the top of the head, and then connect that to the chin, and now we have a drawing of a head in a profile view. Now this is where it's going to get a little goofy with the tricks, because something I like to do is to imagine that I'm writing the letter W to capture the rhythm of the back of the head and the jaw. This is weird, but look, write a W, plug it in, profile head. And again, this is just a trick to help me remember the directions the lines go whenever I'm drawing the head in a profile view. Now for a 3/4 view, it's a bit different from the profile view, but it actually starts fairly similarly in that I'll go as if I was drawing a profile view up until this point, and from here I'll simply just draw a line for the chin like this, and for me, that line really helps me see the head in 3 dimensions by squaring off just the bottom bit of the chin. So again, when I get to this point, instead of connecting the jaw directly to the chin like this, I'll draw a line for the chin which squares off the front of the face, and it helps me to picture in my head how the jaw will connect to the chin as it goes back in space. What I'm picturing is a very boxy head like this, and this line at the bottom being the line that I'm drawing for the chin. And another thing about the 3/4 view is that I like to give a little curve to the line for the side of the face as opposed to a straight line, as it kind of just simulates the rhythm of the skull in a 3/4 view ever so slightly. With this corner at the top roughly lining up to this point of the chin that connects to the jaw, at least in this particular angle. This is pretty much the only real adjustment I make to the head to draw it in a 3/4 view, because as soon as that chin is in there, it makes it so much clearer, to me at least, what the front of the face is and when it becomes the side of the face, at least for this simplified way of drawing heads. Now for the back of the head, the only thing I really think about is this line here, which indicates where the back of the neck connects to the back of the head. And the reason for this is because this line basically tells me exactly what angle the head is in at all times. So if I draw this line in different angles, just that one line will tell me enough information of what position the whole head will be in. And the reason for that is because of the manner in which the neck connects to the back of the head. If we imagine this box as a head, whatever plane of this box I choose to represent the back of the head, the neck will always connect going horizontally across the plane, depending on the position of the head. In other words, with this diagram of the head, here's the line that I was talking about, and notice how this line travels horizontally across the head from ear to ear. So, no matter what position I move the head in, this line will always travel across the head from ear to ear. So, if I go back to these drawings and take this line from this head and try to attach it on this head, no matter where I place that line, it just won't work. And it's only until I change the orientation of the line to go horizontally from ear to ear that the line will now make sense as the base of the head and neck. And the same thing with this line. It's a very simple thing to think about, but for some reason this really helps me personally whenever I'm drawing the back of the head in different positions and in different angles. Just picturing the line going from ear to ear will help me see clearly how to draw the head from the back depending on the orientation of that line, since I know it's always going to be between the ears. And lastly, my only real tip for drawing a head from a low angle or a head looking up, at least in this simplified way, is just by shifting the position of things on the head that move as the head moves. So like the ears and the various features of the face. By putting the ears lower on the head, it simulates the way the ears appear to sit lower on the head as we tilt the head up. And you can really push this effect even further if you wanted to as well. When drawing the head from a low angle, I always like to keep in mind this plane that sits under the jaw, which I like to simplify by imagining as though it were a capital D, just shifted a little bit depending on the angle. And for me, this shape just helps me picture the orientation of the head, because if I can see under the jaw, then I know that I'm looking at the head from a low angle. And so depending on how much of that under jaw I can see, the more severe the angle is. And my last quick tip for whenever you're drawing this angle is that when you're drawing the mouth of the character, try not to draw it as a straight line like this, and instead curve that line as though you were drawing a frowny face. The reason is just because our faces, of course, aren't flat like this sheet of paper. Our facial features will bend to the orientation of our heads, just like when I bend this paper, the features on it will bend along with it. And in truth, it just helps to sell this angle a lot more clearly whenever I draw specifically the mouth in this way. And with that, that's going to do it for today's video on how I draw the head. Once again, as with most things, I don't mind coming back to this subject, as clearly there are lots more things to understand about the head than just the things I went over in this video. Real quick, I want to give a big thank you to everyone who bought a copy of my book, Dynamic Figure Drawing Volume 1. I've now sold 80 copies of the book, almost half of my whole stock now. So thanks so much for your support. It is always a pleasure to pack and send those orders out for you guys. There are still 120 physical copies left in stock of my book on my website, and once they're gone, there will be no more. So if you're interested in checking it out for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description of this video. Before I go, I want to give thanks to my patrons, as always, for all of their support. I've been thinking about doing another, refresh of my Patreon at the start of 2025, but I'll talk about that more another time. And as always, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again as soon as I can.